Yes.
Seattle glitched, I think, when you called us, but Linda has 34 years.
Linda has 34 years. Congratulations, Linda. All right. We concluded the traditions last week, and this week and some of next week will be spent on the concepts. Probably not all of next week. Actually, next week, I will probably do some type of introduction back into the book, the beginning of the book. So that'll take place here next week. As we look at the concepts tonight, and I was thinking about this before we left the house, that how the steps, right, created a need to preserve our unity because we stay sober together, and that gave birth to the traditions. And once we had the traditions and we had our groups, something took place in the late 1940s. Prior to this time, we had what was called the Alcoholic Foundation. They were in New York. They answered phones. They sent out literature. They look kind of like what an intergroup or a central office does now. We had a board of trustees called the Alcoholic Foundation, which today is your General Service Board. There were 5 people on that board. 2 alcoholics and 3 non-alcoholics. It was Frank Amos, Willard Richardson, Leonard Strong, who was Bill Wilson's brother-in-law. When Bill Wilson says in his story that through the kindness of his mother and his brother-in-law, he was put in the hospital. That's the brother-in-law. It was Dr. Leonard Strong. He was married to Bill's sister, Dorothy. So the first 3 non-alcoholics on the Alcoholic Foundation was Willard Richardson, who was John D. Rockefeller's right-hand man, Frank Amos from the Riverside Church in New York, and Leonard Strong, Dr. Leonard Strong, Bill Wilson's brother-in-law. The 2 alcoholics on the board, because it was 3 non-alcoholics and 2 alcoholics, was Dr. Bob Smith from Akron, and the second guy was a guy from New York who unfortunately picked up a drink. And then they replaced him with another guy who picked up a drink. This is in the late 30s. And then they got somebody else in there. Non-alcoholics outnumbered alcoholics as trustees until 1966. Until 1966, the Board of Trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous had a majority that was non-alcoholic. We did not trust ourselves. Bottom line was they thought, man, we got to have some sane people in the room, right? So all of these were, it was always very accomplished people. If you wanted to know who they are today, you could look it up on the internet. You'll find doctors, lawyers, heads of corporations, the trustees, the non-alcoholic trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a very prestigious thing to be asked to do. Today we have 14 alcoholic and 7 that are non-alcoholic. That is the composition of your trustees today. The Class A trustees are the non-alcoholics. The Class B trustees are the alcoholics. So if you hear those things in meetings, Class A trustee, Class B trustee, if you talk about it in your group conscious meeting, these kind of things come up. If you go to a service convention, like an area convention, we just had one up here in Perrysburg, I don't know, a couple months ago. If you go to something like that, these are terms that you will hear. So I want you to be familiar with them. I am not going to sit up here tonight and read out the service manual. I already told y'all that. This is not that kind of party. What I want to do, since there's so many new people, not only here but around the country that are attending this meeting, I want you to become familiar with our third legacy of service. We talk a lot about the steps, we talk a lot about the traditions, and we talk very little about the concepts. So, what happened in the late 1940s, Dr. Bob and Bill had always been the last word when there was an issue in a group or a question. The question went to the co-founders, and they were both alive, and they would answer the questions as best they could. This went on from 1935 into the late 40s, and it was really established. And you know how we are, we hate change, right? Something happened in the late 40s. Dr. Bob got sick. And it was going to be fatal. He was going to die. It was a known thing. And Dr. Bob and Bill sat down and looked at each other and realized Doc's going to die, and eventually Bill's going to die. And when that time comes, where will our fellowship go? Who will answer questions? Right? Who will be the intermediary? Because they were the intermediary between the groups and the trustees. You got your trustees here, right? We said it was 5 of them. Over here, you got all the groups. Who's the intermediary between the groups and the trustees? Well, it was Dr. Bob and Bill. That was the intermediary. Now they realize, late 1940s, they're not going to be here. So what are we going to do? So what they came up with was the idea of establishing a conference, a general service conference. And the general service, somebody is not muted. Please mute.
Yeah, if he wants it with me or with somebody.
Somebody is not
You know what I
muted.
mean? Like,
Everybody check your mute button.
That's good.
So they decided to have this general service conference.
Good. So that's
Tradition 2 is what came to mind for them, was tradition 2. Tradition 2 says, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern.
because this weekend my
Somebody is not muted. Can anybody else hear that?
I'm sorry. I hope.
Wait a minute.
But I do want to go to the Atlantic group probably the following Friday.
Brooklyn, you are not muted.
They can tune up there if you want. Because it's on the website. It's not so bad to get there.
Hold on a minute. Brooklyn, New York, you are not muted.
Okay. Yeah. I used to go to that meeting every week. Yeah.
Hang on just 1 second, please. I will fix it.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
muted. All right. So, tradition 2, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. So what the co-founders believed was that the collective consciousness of the groups should be the intermediary through the general service structure with the trustees. So we have the inverted triangle, and I'm sure some of you have seen that picture. The groups are at the top. Then you have the district, which is where you send your GSR. Then you have the area where you will send the DCM. The area will elect a delegate from your area that will attend the General Service Conference 2 years and then rotate out. Okay. The General Service Conference, okay, at the bottom, you have the trustees who oversee AA World Services and the Grapevine, AA's corporation. So I'm not going to get like really deep into that, but it is an inverted triangle with the membership at the top. The membership is at the top, okay? So when your group elects a GSR, that GSR is the voice of your group. You are delegating authority to your GSR to be the voice of your group. What the whole structure is delegation down the inverted triangle from the top of the triangle, which is the groups. So literally the GSRs, many of whom I'm sure are listening to me right now, is GSRs, literally have replaced the co-founders of AA as the collective consciousness of our fellowship. So you'll hear sometime, you know, John Doe wasn't at the group conscious meeting, so we elected him GSR. You need to stop and think about that. It is a very important position. From that position, the voice of your group will be heard. It'll be heard at the area level, because your group will be participating there, and then through your delegate. So GSR is a very, very important position. So the groups, through their GSR, and a loving God as he may express himself in your group conscience, replaced the co-founders of AA. So the service structure grew again out of a need that was created through our experience. Our service structure came into being, right, to address that need. Just like the traditions came into being to address the need of preservation of our unity, lest we die individually. Okay. So our general service structure, right, if you go to New York and you go to general service, let me read this. In the midst of exuberant success of early AA, Dr. Bob became fatally ill, and Bill asked, when Dr. Bob and I are gone, who would then advise the trustees and the office? The answer Bill felt was to be found in the collective consciousness of the AA groups. But how could the autonomous, widely scattered groups exercise such a responsibility? Over great resistance by trustees and members devoted to the status quo. So the bottom line was Bill suggested, hey, we need to do this. And they was like, no, it worked good just the way it is. We hate change. But Bill said, look, Doc is already on the way out of here, and I'm going after him. This has to take place. So what it says here, Bill managed to sell the idea of calling an AA General Service Conference. And 11 years later, Bill was able to declare the results of the conference have exceeded our highest expectations. And that concept is rooted in tradition too. So that's concept one, the delegation of authority, and we'll see more of that. Concept two, I'm going to read it to you first. The General Service Conference of AA has become, for nearly every practical purpose, the active voice and the effective conscience of our whole society in its world affairs. Concept one establishes the final responsibility and ultimate authority of the AA groups, but in actual practice, how are they to manage AA service affairs? By delegation, concept two declares. So by delegating authority and responsibility, and the responsibility, right, always has to be matched by the authority we give them. In other words, if we say, go run the AA grapevine, okay, we give them that responsibility. Manage the AA grapevine. That comes from the groups, right? We also have to then give them the authority to do so. Does everybody follow that? The authority has to match the responsibility. We can't say, go run the AA grapevine, but before you spend $5, call us. So we can vote on whether or not y'all said, no, it don't work that way. That's what a trusted servant means. Does everybody understand the term trusted servant? We have entrusted you, okay, with the authority to carry out the responsibilities that we have charged you with. Everybody get that? When your group elects a GSR, and your GSR goes to district, okay, and district is talking about, let's just say, where to hold the next, we need to move the district meeting. Where will we move to? Well, I got to go back and talk to my group before I can vote on that. No, or else it'll never get done. You have given your GSR the authority, okay, to represent your group and to vote. Now, if there should be matters that would require, wait a minute, that's, okay, then you can go back and consult, right? And that goes all the way down the line. The trustees can do the same thing. The conference can do the same thing. They can say, wait a minute, this is some kind of big deal here. Maybe it brings into question something to do with a tradition. The trustees are the guardians of our tradition. So maybe something happens that brings into question a tradition, right? We had a situation a couple years ago with a manuscript, and some of you are aware of that. And it was about acquiring property, very expensive property. So it called into question, well, how does this fall within the traditions, right? And I'm not going to get into the whole thing. It's been resolved now. But always remember, the groups are at the top of the inverted triangle. The groups have the power to exercise what we call the power of the purse. where does the money come from, right, that pays for all of this? Come from the groups, doesn't it? Come from your seventh tradition. So hopefully your group is sending money to New York. Because what ended up happening in that particular, the power of the purse came into play. A lot of people said, look, if our money is going to get tied up in this kind of stuff, we're going to stop sending it. And a lot of them did. And the situation was resolved. I'm not saying that that was the only thing that resolved the situation, but it certainly played a part in it. So always remember, the groups are at the top. Okay? But we have to give our trusted servants the authority to match the responsibility that we're charging them with. Okay? And that's really the essence of concept 2. AA groups as a whole, but if the groups were to carry out their primary purpose, they would have to delegate their leadership role to a general service conference. They do this by electing a general service representative, a GSR, for each group. Would all the GSRs in this room right now please raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 4 of them in here today. Excellent. Excellent. These GSRs meet regularly in area assemblies and every 2 years elect a delegate from among their number. Every April, the delegates from the 93 areas in the U.S. and Canada meet for 6 days with the trustees of the General Service Board, the staffs of the General Service Office, and the AA Grapevine and other service workers. Thus, the General Service Conference of AA is the actual voice and effective conscience of our whole society in its world affairs. And it starts at the top of the triangle and comes down. Okay? Concept 2. Now, we talk a lot about in the traditions how not only are these principles, right, paramount in applying the traditions in our groups, but also in our everyday life. Okay. Tradition 2, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. How would that work at home? The family that prays together? Thank you. Right? Who's the head of the house? Is God at the forefront of what we're trying to do and trying to be? Okay. So that tradition 2 will certainly be applicable to our lives, as would all of them. So in concepts 3, 4, and 5, we are going to see some principles that can be applied to our everyday life, just like we did in the 12 traditions. So concept 3, let's start with that one. To ensure effective leadership, we should endow each element of the AA, the conference, the General Service Board, and its service corporations, staffs, committee, and executive with a traditional right of decision. Okay? I'm going to read this for you real quick. A background for this concept, you should be familiar with the conference charter and the bylaws of the General Service Board, both of which are found in the service manual. I was just handed a service manual. This is the AA service manual. They are available right here at the intergroup office for the lovely price of $3.95. So anybody wants to get one of these, I highly recommend it. And read it for yourself. Thank you, Joe. All right, let me get back to you. For except for the specific directions in these documents, every trusted servant in every AA entity at all levels of service has the right to decide how they will interpret and apply their own authority and responsibility to each particular problem or situation as it arises. That is, they can decide which problems they will dispose of themselves and upon which matters they will report, consult, or ask specific directions. This is the essence of the right of decision. So our trusted servant can make a decision about how they want to vote on something, or they can make a decision about whether they need to report, consult, or ask specific direction. But it is a decision, and they have the right to make it. When you elect them as a trusted servant, give them that authority. But this right also means the fellowship must have trust in its trusted servants. If the groups instruct their GSRs rather than giving them a right of decision, then the area conference will be hamstrung. If the GSRs instruct the area delegates rather than giving them the right of decision, then the General Service Conference is hamstrung. As Bill points out, our conference delegates are primarily the servants of AA, as they should, cast their votes according to the best dictates of their own judgment and conscience at that time. The right of decision. There's a line in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that says, first of all, we had to quit playing God. In my everyday life, do I allow people the freedom and dignity of the right of decision? Or am I trying to manage other people's lives? The right of decision is huge. I've had circumstances in my own life where I have people who I have cared deeply about, I have watched indulge in very destructive behavior. And I came to realize over the years that I don't have the right to interfere in the decisions people make. And I'm not talking about children, I'm talking about adults. People have and should be given the freedom and the dignity to make their own decisions. At times it's very difficult to do this. But it is a cornerstone of the spiritual program of Alcoholics Anonymous and our 12 steps. Our book is very clear about trying to impose our will on the world and the results of it. Our book is very clear that if someone comes here to Alcoholics Anonymous and says that they believe they can do it on their own or do it another way, we don't interfere with that. Is everybody following me? It's the right of decision, and it's not always an easy thing to do. Especially, and I want you to listen to this closely, when I think I know better. When I think I know better, check my track record out. Okay? Harkens to a conversation I had with my mother. And she told me, I will not interfere with what you want to do, even if it kills you. And my mother gave me the freedom and the dignity to let alcohol finish its job. And to let self-will finish its job. I always say the biggest gift I was given when I got here was I was completely out of options. It's the biggest gift I had when I got here. Didn't know what y'all had, didn't know how you got it, didn't know nothing. Some of it sounded okay, some of it didn't sound okay, but I could tell you this, I was all out of argument. I was allowed the freedom and the dignity to show up here empty. The right of decision, does that play in my everyday life? Betcha. Welcome to Concept 3. Concept 4. At all responsible levels, we ought to maintain a traditional right of participation, allowing a voting representation in reasonable proportion to the responsibility that each must discharge. And the real essence in terms of the general service structure of Concept 4 is when we have the General Service Conference, we send our delegates, right? We also have the trustees there. We have also those people who work there. You know, we have people who work at General Service, brilliant people, right? We have our people that are in charge of public information, H&I, all the committees that we have that you will find in New York. We have people who are connected to different things in the office, areas of expertise that they get. So when we have a General Service Conference, not only do your delegates, your trustees, get a vote when something comes to the floor, but those people are involved as well. Why would we not? They're there every day. They know way more about this stuff than any of us ever will, and maybe more than some of the delegates and people in the room. Did you find out what I'm saying? So the right of participation is based on, right, their amount of expertise and participation in what goes on in Alcoholics Anonymous. That makes sense to you? Okay? They are a very valuable resource. A very valuable resource. The right of participation. Read a little bit of something here. The principle of the right of participation is built into the General Service Conference through the conference charter. Voting members include not only delegates, but also the trustees and the directors and staff members of AA World Services, i.e. GSO, and the AA Grapevine. Finally, there is a spiritual reason for the right of participation. Stay with me now. All of us desire to belong. In AA, no members are second class. The right of participation therefore reinforces tradition too, that no member is placed in ultimate authority over another. We perform our service task better when we are sure we belong, when our participation assures us that we are truly the trusted servants described in tradition too. How does that play in my everyday life? The right of participation. No second-class citizens. I'm not better than anyone else. I'm not less than anyone else. Everyone has the right to participate. Is that not the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous? Tradition 3. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. And you're as good as anyone in here. It's a beautiful thing. There's no more better than or less than. There's no more separation, which is what kills people like me. Separation is what kills people. What did Chamberlain say? One problem which has encompassed all problems, conscious separation from God and our fellows. One solution, conscious contact with God and our fellows. It starts for me here. I learned that here. I came here better than or less than. Always better than in the way I acted, always less than in the way I felt. Is anybody with me? Always better than in the way I act, but always less than in the way I feel. I belong nowhere. I am a man without a country. How many times you used to hear it a lot? Well, Joe will remember this. Back in the 60s, people used to go to California to find themselves. Remember them days? You went, didn't you? You just got back, didn't you? And people used to go out there. That was a big thing. I want to find myself. I want to find my place. Now, I want you to stop and think about this. Did you find a place here? Did you find a place here? And if so, take a look at what made this place such a home for you. Do you ever feel better when you leave a meeting? Yeah. I've been in the presence of the Spirit, a loving God, as He may express Himself when I grew conscious. We pray at the beginning, in the middle, at the beginning of the meeting, at the end of the meeting, and God is in our midst. And there's no, I don't have to meet any criteria here. I don't have to, what does the book say? No fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please. These are the conditions we have found to be most effective. I want you to look at that. I want you to look at tradition 3. I want you to look at concept 4. The right to participate. Everybody has the right to participate. Everybody has the right of decision to participate in your own life. And I can look back at my life prior to being here and how much I interfered or tried to interfere with people's right to participate. I tried to dominate people's lives a lot of times. I tried to control people. And what did that do? What does that do when you do that? It puts you at odds. It separates you. My purpose of serving God and helping people cannot manifest itself when I'm separated from you. A man without a country. Act better than on the outside, feel less than on the inside. Story of my life. Concept 4, the right of participation. The people in your life have the right to participate in life. In your home. How about at work? How does the right of participation play out at work? Do I have to be Mr. Know-it-all? Try to dominate, make everybody see that my way of doing things is the right way and the only way? I sat in a meeting in Dearborn, Michigan at Ford Motor Company World Headquarters, and I asked a very, very powerful and famous man, how do you get in that seat? Because I ask questions like that. How do you get in that seat? I'm going to tell you what he told me. He said, Ken, I learned how to listen to people. I learned how to let people be a part of. And what I found out was that it enriched my understanding, my ability to do my job more than anything I've ever learned. The right of participation. See, life is much like here. If you want what we got, do what we do. And I learned a lot that day. And I learned how to listen to people who work for me. And it is amazing what you can learn when you accept the fact that you don't know. And it's okay not to know. All of that is ego. Even though in your heart you know you don't know, but you act like you do. It's all about the condition of the spirit, isn't it? It's all about the condition of the spirit. The purpose of the steps is to get rid of what stands between me and God and me and you. And if you look at the traditions, they carry it a step further. And if you look at the concepts, it carries it even further. Do you see how one flows into two, flows into three? Three legacies. I hope I'm making sense. Concept 4. So we go on now to concept 5. I'll read it here. Throughout our structure, a traditional right of appeal ought to prevail so that the minority opinion will be heard and personal grievances receive careful consideration. The right of appeal, the minority decision. The right of appeal, the minority decision. Oh, I thought you were looking at something. The right of appeal recognizes that minorities frequently can be right, that even when they are in error, they still perform a most valuable service when they compel a thorough going debate on important issues. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this. The right of appeal. So if there's a group conscious meeting and the group wants to change its time from 7:30 to 8 o'clock, change the meeting time 7:30 to 8 o'clock. 9 people, somebody gives a very persuasive speech. 9 out of 10 vote yes. Let's change from 7:30 to 8. There's one person sitting over in the corner. I vote no. Well, it's 9-1, it's over. Is it? No. Here's what the right of appeal says. There's two things that are important here. First, no vote should ever be taken until all facts are known to all members. All facts have to be known. You cannot vote in ignorance. Everybody follow that? So first off, we got to know all the ramifications of this decision. Now, having reached that point, we take an informed vote. Now, one person's voting against, okay? So, why are you voting against? Well, this meeting used to be at 8 o'clock before any of you got here. We changed it to 7:30 because Cedar Point traffic at 8 o'clock, between 7:30 and 8, stopped a lot of people from coming to the meeting. But we found if we started at 7:30, people would come because they wouldn't have to say, now I'm making this up, but I'm just using that as an example. Okay, so this person now has presented something that's going to make everybody, now let's have discussion around that. Is there something that has changed now that would make it okay to be at 8 o'clock? Or will that situation still persist? Are you following me? Okay, so the right of participation, the right of decision, and now the right of appeal. The minority voice is heard. Conversation takes place. And now the vote still may go to 8 o'clock, but it's going to go to 8 o'clock with everybody having been heard. And that's a really good thing. Do you feel valued as a person when you get to speak? When you get to present whatever it is, your point of view might be on something. Again, nobody better than, nobody less than. But here's what I have learned over the years. A lot of decisions are often made emotionally. Somebody gets scared, gets a bunch of people fired up, and a crazy decision gets made. Some of you know what groupthink is, right? It's always good if somebody in the room who has another point of view gets to present it. A lot of times it'll calm everybody down, it'll reel some people in, okay? And we'll get a chance to talk about it. And oftentimes the majority will conclude that they were wrong. How does that play out in our personal lives? That would play out at home. It would play out at work. Well, this is what we're going to do. It's my way or the highway. Boy, that really makes for healthy relationships, doesn't it? What does that do? Once again, causes what? Separation. Inclusiveness. Nobody better, nobody less than. Everybody with a vote, everybody with an equal opportunity to present their point of view. basis of healthy relationships. I don't know how many times over the years I've walked out of meetings at work and thought to myself, what a jerk. Right? I mean, again, right? You go in there, they don't want to listen to nothing. You know, I was so glad in the 90s when things started to change. And the only reason things started to change, I worked in automotive, we got in trouble. When people start listening when their jobs get threatened, right? So they got in trouble. And all of a sudden, what our company found out was that there is billions of dollars worth of experience walking in and out of these gates every day, and we never tapped it. We never tapped it. And the work group was born. And we had they formed work groups in the plants by our departments, by our classifications. And they said to us, tell us what you think. What do you need? Well, we've been here 20, 30 years. Y'all finally asked, I've had the opportunity to use that with people who work for me who never had the chance to participate before. And what I will tell you is that the results, I mean, I hoped that it would work okay. I would have been cool with that. And the results were astounding. My boss's 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 boss said to me, this is plain language, how the hell did you do that? And it's all stuff I learned here. But how do you explain that to people, who don't, I mean, he was a my way or the highway guy, And I just gave him a chance to be a part of it. That was the best answer I could give. How does that work, though, right? In your job. Give them a chance to be a part of it. You have to yell and scream and try to make people do what you want them to do. The results are amazing. The right of appeal to allow other people to be heard and to be open-minded enough to say, hey, maybe that's a better idea. How cool is that? Right of decision, right of appeal, right of participation. Stuff I use every day. Every day, and it's very cool. And these are the principles when we start talking about the 3 legs of the stool. These are things that are available to us, not just the 12 steps, not just the 12 traditions, but also the 12 concepts. Lastly, quickly, we hit concept 6. The conference recognizes that the chief initiative and active responsibility in most World Service matters should be exercised by trustee members of the conference acting as the General Service Board. We have seen that the final responsibility and ultimate authority for AA service activities rest with the AA groups. But to carry out this responsibility, they must delegate to the conference. The conference, in turn, must delegate administrative authority to the General Service Board of Trustees. Again, it is helpful if you're familiar with both the conference charter and the bylaws of the board to understand this relationship and the freedom of action that the trustees must have. The trustees have legal and practical responsibility for the operation of AA World Services, which embraces AA Publishing as well as the General Service Office and of the AA Grapevine Incorporated. These entities have a combined cash flow of many millions of dollars annually. The trustees are also responsible for AA's public information activities. They are the guardians of the 12 traditions. They are responsible for carrying the AA message to other countries around the world. They are AA's bankers, overseeing the financial operations and investing AA's substantial reserve fund. So concept 6 is about the responsibility that is exercised by the trustees in overseeing our AA World Services, which is General Service Office, that's AA Grapevine, and our publishing. So the trustees answer to the General Service Conference, which is your delegates. Your delegates answer, of course, to the groups. Does everybody see that? So that authority matches responsibility. We have the right of appeal, the right of decision, the right of participation. Are you kind of just, I'm not getting deep into this, but you kind of see how this thing is put together. Right. With a loving God who may express himself in our group conscience, we talked about that in concept 1. Steps flow into traditions, flow into the concepts. So that's concepts 1 through 6. Next week, we will do 6 through 12. And as I said, we'll probably have time for a little bit of an introduction of getting back into the book the following week.